The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that unsettles you, broken only by the faint hum of sirens outside. Blue and red lights flickered across the window blinds, painting the walls in shadows. On the living room floor lay Elena Walker, a woman who had believed love could heal even the deepest scars. Her body was still, her life stolen in the very place where she thought she had built safety. Sitting across from her, handcuffed, was Marcus Reed, a man who had only been free for a few short months after serving 20 years in prison. His head was bowed, his shoulders trembling as if the weight of freedom itself had crushed him. This wasn't just another crime in Chicago. This was a story of love, trauma, and trust torn apart. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Before prison hardened him, Marcus Reed was just another young man trying to survive the south side of Chicago. Born into poverty, his childhood was marked by chaos, absent father, struggling mother, and a city that often swallowed boys whole before they reached adulthood. Marcus was smart, resourceful, and fiercely loyal to his friends. But those qualities were quickly tested in a neighborhood where gangs offered protection when society offered none. At 19, a botched robbery changed everything. Marcus wasn't the one who pulled the trigger, but he was there, and the law didn't care about the difference. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. For Marcus, the world outside stopped at that moment. For the next 2 decades, his name would be tied to concrete walls, steel bars, and a number instead of a future. His dreams, his youth, his freedom, all traded for survival. Prison was a world Marcus Reed could never have imagined until he was thrown inside it. The noise was constant, the clang of doors, the shouting of men who had nothing left to lose. Violence wasn't a possibility, it was a language. Marcus quickly realized that survival depended on alliances, discipline, and a cold heart. But in the middle of that concrete jungle, he found another version of himself. He started reading, taking classes, and working out daily. The boy who once hustled on the streets became a man who studied psychology books at night and lifted weights until his body looked like it had been carved from stone. He became a quiet force in the prison yard, respected not just for his strength, but for his ability to think before acting. 20 years is a lifetime, and inside those walls, Marcus reinvented himself. But the cost was learning to feel nothing. When Marcus Reed finally walked out of the correctional center, the world felt unrecognizable. 20 years had erased the Chicago he once knew. The streets were crowded with new businesses, new faces, and technology he couldn't comprehend. Cars looked different. Phones were no longer wired, and even the music on the radios felt like a foreign language. But beyond the noise of the city, Marcus carried something heavier. 2 decades of silence, discipline, and survival. For the first time in his adult life, he could breathe fresh air without the watch of a guard. Yet freedom came with its own kind of prison. Loneliness. Everyone he once loved had moved on. Family members had either passed away or cut ties long ago. Standing at the bus stop that first evening, Marcus realized that freedom was not just about leaving prison. It was about finding someone who believed he was more than the crime that defined him. Marcus's first weeks of freedom were marked by silence. He stayed in a halfway house run by a local nonprofit, where other men like him, freshly released, trying to piece their lives together. He would sit by the window most evenings, watching people hurry home from work, families laughing in cars, couples holding hands. It was these small glimpses of normal life that hurt the most. He wanted it, but he wasn't sure if the world would allow him to have it. Employers turned him away, skeptical of a man who spent half his life behind bars. Even churchgoers offered pity more than acceptance. Marcus often wondered if his punishment would ever truly end, or if this was just another kind of sentence, one where society would forever remind him of his past. The turning point came one afternoon at a community reintegration event. Marcus had been invited reluctantly, expecting another round of empty smiles and judgment. But that day, as he stood quietly at the back, he noticed her, a volunteer coordinator with an easy laugh and a voice that carried warmth. She introduced herself simply as Elena. And unlike the others, she didn't look at Marcus like he was a broken man. She asked questions, not about his crime, but about his favorite books, his music, his hopes. Marcus was taken aback. He had almost forgotten how it felt to be seen as a person, not a file number. For weeks after, she kept crossing paths. A simple hello at the coffee station, a short chat after a workshop. Each time, her sincerity chipped away at the walls Marcus had built over decades. For the first time since walking out of prison, he felt the faint stirrings of hope.
Their romance wasn't built on public displays or easy declarations. It was stitched together in stolen moments, whispered words, and risks they both knew they were taking. Marcus and Elena lived in a kind of shadow, careful about who saw them together. To most of the world, Marcus was just another ex-offender trying to blend back into society. To Elena's colleagues, she was simply a volunteer too empathetic for her own good. What no one knew was that behind closed doors, their connection was becoming impossible to hide. Every time Marcus visited her apartment, Elena drew the curtains tight. She kept her phone on silent, afraid of questions she couldn't answer. And yet, as much as secrecy weighed on her, the thrill of being with Marcus made her heart race in a way she hadn't felt in years. For Marcus, the secrecy was harder. He wanted to tell the world that someone had finally seen him as more than his criminal record. But he also understood the risks Elena faced. Society was cruel to men like him. It judged them without pause. It doubted their sincerity. If anyone discovered their relationship, Elena's reputation could be shattered, her work questioned. So he held back. He kept their romance folded away like a letter no one else was meant to read. Still, there were nights when they let the world slip away entirely. Long evenings cooking together in Elena's kitchen, laughing as Marcus burned the rice but redeemed himself with perfectly seasoned chicken. Late nights sitting on her balcony, Elena's head resting on his shoulder while he told her about prison. The nights without silence, the fear of never seeing daylight again, the friendships lost in the yard. Those were the nights their intimacy deepened, where love became both refuge and rebellion. The more time they spent together, the harder it became to separate fantasy from reality. Elena knew the risk. Her friends warned her that men like Marcus were dangerous, that love could blind her to red flags. But each time she looked at him, she didn't see an ex-convict. She saw the man who carefully fixed her leaky sink, who remembered how she liked her tea, who looked at her as if she was the only good thing left in his world. Marcus, too, let his guard down. He allowed himself to dream of a life he thought was lost forever, one filled with dinners, laughter, and love. Yet beneath it all, there was a quiet current of fear. They were hiding something too fragile to expose, too real to deny. Their love was alive, but it was also living on borrowed time. The cracks widened when Marcus began to suspect the very love that had saved him. Years in prison had taught him that trust could be fatal, that betrayal always hid just around the corner. Those lessons clung to him like iron chains. If Elena answered a late-night phone call, Marcus demanded to know who it was. If she worked late, he accused her of hiding something. She reassured him endlessly, but her words bounced against a wall of suspicion built long before she ever met him. At first, Elena dismissed it as adjustment. She told herself he's just learning to be free again. But the jealousy kept growing. Marcus sometimes showed up unannounced at her job, standing quietly in the corner, scanning the faces of every man who spoke to her. His eyes carried a silent question. Is this the one you're keeping from me? Inside their home, intimacy became a battlefield. Marcus clung to her as if love were proof she wouldn't leave him. But even in their most tender moments, a shadow lingered. He would whisper promises of forever, but moments later lash out in fear that she might abandon him for someone who hadn't spent half a lifetime behind bars. Elena tried to hold the pieces together to remind him that love wasn't a prison cell. Yet every time she reached for the man she first fell in for, she found another fragment of the prison that lived inside him. The tension crept into their daily routines. Dinner conversations turned into interrogations. A simple smile exchanged with a neighbor became evidence of betrayal in Marcus's mind. He apologized after each outburst, often with tears, admitting he didn't want to lose her. Elena, torn between love and exhaustion, forgave him again and again, but forgiveness was losing its weight. Each cycle left her a little more drained and left Marcus a little more desperate. Their bond, once a lifeline, was now tethered to a storm neither could control. And though neither of them knew it yet, they were standing at the edge of a breaking point that would decide whether love could survive or be consumed by the very fears that created it. The breaking point came quietly, not in one single explosion, but in a slow series of small fractures that built into something unstoppable. Elena had begun confiding in her closest friend, telling her how Marcus's paranoia was suffocating her. She loved him. She reminded herself of that every time she saw the boyish smile that had first melted her guard. But the weight of his suspicions was eating away at her. She told her friend in hushed tones, "Sometimes I feel like I'm still living in his prison." Marcus sensed the distance, even when she tried to hide it. One evening, when Elena came home later than usual, he was waiting at the door, pacing, eyes bloodshot. He demanded to know where she had been. She said she had stayed late at work, but Marcus didn't believe her. The silence between them was louder than any shouting. That night, words turned to shouting anyway. Marcus accused her of betrayal. Elena, for the first time, shouted back. She told him she couldn't live like this, that she wasn't his guard, wasn't his cellmate, wasn't his enemy. She was the woman who had loved him enough to see him as more than an inmate. Her voice cracked when she said, "If you can't trust me, Marcus, then what are we even doing?" Marcus froze. For a moment, it looked as if her words had struck him awake, as if he could see the damage his fear had caused. But instead of pulling back, his mind spiraled further. He convinced himself her anger was proof that she was hiding something, proof that he had been right to suspect her all along. In that moment, the fragile foundation of their love collapsed. The man who had once clung to her as his savior now looked at her as if she were the enemy. And in the shadows of their home, the love story that had begun as an unlikely miracle was transforming into something darker, something that neither of them could walk away from unchanged. The shouting didn't stop that night. Marcus's voice echoed through the small apartment, the sound raw and jagged, years of pent-up fear disguised as anger. Elena stood her ground, trembling but unflinching, demanding he stop treating her like a suspect. Her words cut, and for the first time, Marcus stepped too close, so close she could feel the heat of his breath, his chest rising and falling like he was still back in the prison yard, ready for a fight. Elena's eyes widened, and in that split second, Marcus saw the fear in her face. Not fear of being caught, not fear of betrayal, but fear of him. And that realization broke something inside him. He slammed his hand against the wall, just inches from her head, the sound making her flinch. He didn't strike her, but the gesture alone felt like a warning, a glimpse of the violence caged inside him for so long.
"Don't you lie to me," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "I've been lied to my whole life. I can't take it anymore." His fists were clenched, veins running thick across his arms. Elena, holding back tears, whispered back, "Then maybe you never should have asked me to love you." The silence that followed was unbearable. Marcus stepped back, hands trembling, realizing how close he had come to crossing a line he swore he never would. Elena slipped into the bedroom, locking the door behind her, and for the first time since she had met him, she felt unsafe in the arms of the man she once believed she could save. Marcus spent the night on the couch, staring into the dark. But inside his mind, the prison walls had returned. He felt abandoned, betrayed, and cornered, all the emotions that once defined his life behind bars. And when a man feels cornered, sometimes he lashes out in ways that change everything. The following evening, Marcus and Elena sat in silence across the kitchen table. Plates of untouched food cooled between them. The air so heavy was hard to breathe. Neither had slept after the argument the night before, and both carried the weight of unspoken words. Marcus tapped his fingers against the wood, a small restless habit he had carried from the prison yard. Elena's eyes darted to the clock, as if waiting for the moment she could walk out the door and not look back. Finally, Marcus spoke. His voice was low, steady, but charged with something dangerous beneath the calm. "Tell me the truth, Elena. Is there someone else?" Her silence was an answer in itself. She didn't look up, didn't argue, didn't reassure him. She just let the quiet linger. And that silence sent Marcus into a spiral he couldn't control. He slammed his hand against the table, sending the plates rattling to the floor. "I gave you 20 years of pain in one man's body, and you can't even give me honesty." She stood, her hands trembling, as she tried to walk away. But Marcus grabbed her arm, too tightly, his grip fueled by all the fear of abandonment that had haunted him since childhood. She screamed for him to let go, tears streaming down her face. In that split second, Marcus felt the rage of every betrayal, every fight, every lonely night in a cell. And then, violence. The struggle was short, chaotic and devastating. Neighbors later reported hearing muffled screams and the sound of furniture being knocked over. When the apartment fell silent again, Marcus stood over Elena, his chest heaving, the reality of what he had done crashing into him like a tidal wave. Elena, the woman who once looked at him as if he were more than his past, lay lifeless at his feet. And in that moment, Marcus realized he had become the very thing he feared most. A prisoner, not of walls, but of his own rage.
Marcus froze where he stood, staring at Elena's body sprawled on the kitchen floor. Her chest no longer rose and fell. Her eyes, once so full of life, stared blankly into the ceiling. For a few seconds, the world seemed to stop. No sound, no movement, just the echo of what he had done pressing down on him like a weight he could never lift. Then reality hit. His breathing quickened, his hands shook violently. As he knelt down beside her, whispering her name, begging her to wake up. "Elena, please, I didn't mean it. Wake up, wake up." But the silence mocked him. He pressed his fingers against her neck, desperately searching for a pulse that wasn't there. His body trembled as regret poured over him, so strong it nearly brought him to its knees. In his panic, Marcus staggered back, knocking over a chair. His mind raced. "If I called the police, they'll never believe me. 20 years inside and now this? They'll say it was always in me. They'll say I'm still the same man I was back then." He looked at his hands that had just taken the only person who ever loved him. He felt sick. The apartment seemed to close in on him, every creak of the floorboards sounding like sirens in the distance. He stumbled into the bathroom, splashing cold water on his face, trying to steady his breathing. But when he caught himself in the mirror, he hardly recognized the man staring back. His eyes were wild, haunted, and full of dread. Marcus thought of dragging her body, hiding it, anything to erase the evidence of what had just happened. He pulled a blanket from the couch, draping it clumsily over her still form, as though covering her would somehow undo the reality. But every move only deepened his panic. He couldn't cover what he had done, and he couldn't escape it either. At one point, he reached for his phone, his thumb hovering over the keypad, ready to dial 911, but fear stopped him cold. He dropped the phone onto the counter, gripping his head with both hands, pacing the apartment as tears burned his eyes. His breaths came shallow, his chest tight as if he couldn't get enough air. For Marcus, this wasn't just the end of Elena's life. It was the collapse of his second chance. In one violent moment, everything he had hoped for outside those prison walls was gone. He knew, deep down, there was no way out.
The hours after Elena's death dragged like an eternity. Marcus sat in silence, rocking back and forth on the couch, staring at the blanket that covered her. Every tick of the clock reminded him that time was slipping away, but his mind was frozen, unable to choose between confession and escape. He thought of running, leaving the apartment, catching a bus out of the city, but where could he go? His record, his face, his entire past would make him easy to trace. He had been caged too long to vanish without a trail. By dawn, the world outside his apartment was already awake. Neighbors stirred, children left for school, and in that ordinary rhythm of life, Marcus's secret grew heavier. It didn't take long before the silence inside Elena's home raised suspicion. Her sister had been trying to call her all night. When no answer came, she drove to the apartment. Knocking at the door, she heard nothing, but a strange stillness unsettled her. After minutes of trying, she called the landlord, who unlocked the door with his spare key. The moment the door swung open, reality spilled into the hallway. Elena's sisters saw Marcus sitting in the corner, face buried in his hands, the blanket covering her motionless body. The scream that followed was piercing enough to draw neighbors from their apartments. Within minutes, police cars swarmed the street. Marcus didn't fight. He didn't resist. As officers pulled him up, handcuffing his wrists, he barely spoke. His voice cracked only once, whispering, "I didn't mean to." But it was too late. The blanket slipped away, exposing the truth, and the weight of his choices bore down harder than any chain the prison had ever placed on him. The ride back to custody was quiet, but inside his mind, chaos raged. He replayed every moment with Elena. Her laughter, her warmth, her belief in him, and now the betrayal that ended it all. 20 years locked away had taught him how to survive, but nothing had prepared him for the loneliness of knowing he had destroyed the only person who gave him hope. The discovery of Elena's body sent shock waves across the neighborhood. By the time Marcus was let out in handcuffs, neighbors had gathered outside the building, whispering and pointing. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others with anger. For many, Marcus was the man who had returned from prison quietly, trying to rebuild his life. Few knew about Elena's relationship with him, and those who did kept it to themselves. But now the secrecy was gone, replaced by headlines that spread within hours. Ex-inmate arrested in woman's death. Inside the apartment, detectives moved with practiced efficiency. They photographed the scene, marked evidence, and collected Marcus's fingerprints. The phone records revealed unanswered calls from Elena's sister, text messages that stopped suddenly the night before, and the eerie silence that confirmed something had gone wrong. To them, this wasn't a mystery. It was a case of passion turned fatal. Marcus was taken to the station, where he sat in a dimly lit room for hours. The interrogators pressed him, asking when the argument started, why he hadn't called for help, and what exactly happened in those final minutes. Marcus's voice wavered. He admitted there had been an argument, admitted that it turned physical, but when asked about intent, he only shook his head, saying, "I didn't mean for it to happen." The officers wrote it down, but their faces betrayed little sympathy. As news spread, the community reacted. Some felt pity, saying Marcus was broken by the system, a man who spent half his life behind bars and never learned how to live outside it. Others felt only anger, saying Elena had trusted him, risked everything for him, and paid with her life. Social media lit up with debates. Was Marcus a victim of circumstance, or was he simply a violent man who had fooled everyone around him? Weeks later, the courtroom filled with reporters, Elena's grieving family, and onlookers drawn by the shocking case. Marcus stood before the judge, dressed in a plain jumpsuit, head bowed. The prosecution painted a picture of obsession, jealousy, and uncontrolled rage. The defense tried to argue years of institutional trauma, saying Marcus had been shaped by prison into a man who didn't know how to love or freedom. But no matter how the arguments clashed, one fact remained: Elena was gone. In the gallery, Elena's sister wept quietly, clutching a photo of her sibling, while Marcus avoided eye contact, unable to face the pain he had caused. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the judge's gavel, echoing like the final chapter of a life once filled with hope. The courtroom held its breath as the verdict was read. The jury, after days of testimony, long deliberations, and painful replaying of Elena's last moments, returned with their decision. Guilty of second-degree murder. Marcus's face fell. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time since his arrest, he wept openly. The tears weren't for himself. They were for Elena, for the life she gave him, the trust she placed in him, and the future he destroyed with one irreversible act. The judge's voice was steady but stern as he handed down the sentence. 30 years in state prison. For Marcus, it was a crushing blow. He had already lost 20 years of his life behind bars, and now he was destined to spend most of what remained locked away once more. As the gavel came down, Elena's family embraced each other, both relieved and heartbroken. Justice was served, but no verdict could ever bring her back. Back in prison, Marcus replayed their story over and over. He remembered her laughter, the way she believed in him when nobody else did, the secret moments they shared that felt almost sacred. But memory could be cruel. It brought both comfort and torture, forcing him to face the reality that his anger, his inability to let go of the habits prison drilled into him, cost a woman's her life. In the silence of his cell, Marcus admitted to himself that prison had never truly left him, and maybe it never would. Elena's name lived on, not just in the grief of her family, but in the conversation sparked by her story. Advocates spoke about the hidden dangers of loving someone broken by years of incarceration, the importance of mental health care for reintegrated inmates, and the thin line between redemption and relapse. To some, Elena became a symbol of love's risks. To others, Marcus was a warning about the scars of prison life and the damage they can leave behind. And for the viewers listening now, the question lingers. What does this story really say about love, freedom, and second chances? Was Marcus doomed from the start, or did he throw away the only lifeline he had ever been given? Before we close, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe so you never miss any of our upcoming true crime stories.